Welcome back to another episode of the Yellowhammer Sports Podcast. I'm your host, CJ Duncan, and we are so glad to be back with you all this week. We have a very special guest, a familiar guest, a face that you have seen before, Michael Brauner with Yellowhammer News. Michael, thank you again for being with us today.
Absolutely. Always appreciate the opportunity to hop on.
Well, it's great to have you, and for our audience, really, we just wanted to jump in and kind of dig in the weeds as right before we get into bowl season. As you know, bowl season's coming up next week, and really some games have even started. But a lot of the games that a lot of us want to tune into, sit on our couches all day and watch, they're coming up here in the next couple days. So Michael and I, we're just going to jump in, talk a little SEC ball, and then also talk about this bracket and what we think of it. Let's just dive right in. This is one of the first years in a while that Auburn and Alabama are not playing in some type of significant game or meaningful game in December. What are your thoughts on the future of really both programs as we see this year come to an end? Is this a fluke where we're kind of seeing both of them out of the race, or do you have concerns about either team?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're coming from two different places. I have independent concerns for each, I guess, for different reasons, you could say. I mean, for Auburn in year two under Freeze, you kind of hoped that they would. I think those who expected them to win 8 or 9 games were probably a little bit unrealistic for the start. And I don't know if anyone expected that necessarily, but that was the hope for a ceiling. They're improved under year two with Hugh Freeze's system. Peyton Thorne has another year under his belt, and obviously some talented freshman receivers that came in. And then, not only did they not get better, they regressed. Especially, they got better down the course, down the end of the season, and that win against Texas A&M can at least carry you over. And far from a successful season, but you can at least carry that momentum over. And now, their entire quarterback room has departed. Thorne is out of eligibility, and Garner and Brown are in the portal, and Walker White goes into the portal as well. So, we'll see what happens. They bring in Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, who obviously beat Alabama. Him and Hugh Freeze can have that in common in terms of probably why they're at Auburn. But no, I mean, Arnold was a highly touted 5-star guy. So if Freeze can get the most out of him, who knows? But other than that, they're bringing in Deuce Knight, freshman who's supposed to be their quarterback of the future as well. I hope Freeze gets to hang around long enough to coach him, because it looks like Arnold is going to be the guy next year. And I think if you don't win in 2025, that noise starts to get pretty loud surrounding Hugh Freeze. We'll see what actually happens. But for Alabama, yeah, I mean, they fell short. There's no question about it, and they had some really disappointing efforts. And especially, the Oklahoma game is the one that's a really tough pill to swallow. Obviously, the Vanderbilt game was what it was, but you still had everything in front of you at that point, even after the loss to Tennessee. And to show up the way they did against Oklahoma was pretty unfortunate. But I also kind of felt that Jalen Milroe for Kalen DeBoer, talking about quarterback for Alabama, he was always kind of a square peg in a round hole in this Kalen DeBoer offense. And DeBoer took the job, and it kind of came with Milroe, which is fine, and big thanks to Milroe for everything he did over the last 2 years, and especially with the transition. But I think DeBoer certainly needs to get his hand-picked guy in there. Would you have liked to have seen them make a run into the expanded 12-team playoff? Sure, but I don't think this team was ever going to win a national championship.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the nose too, especially about the Milrose situation. I think you saw DeBoer, especially coming off of bye weeks, you see him trying to evolve the offense to cater it toward Jalen Milroe. It wasn't necessarily what he would like to do, but he changed it, thinking it would be in best suited for what Alabama and this team was this particular year. So it'd be nice to see him kind of go get his guy, a guy that fits his system and what he likes to do during a football game. But let's stick with the whole NIL and portal situation. And you spoke about it briefly with Jackson Arnold and the Auburn situation, but although there seems to be a little bit of normalcy about the NIL and portal situation, at least for me, it feels like it's just what it is now. It's almost time to stop getting upset about it or complaining about it at this point. This is what it is. But there are there are still some moves that make you kind of cringe a little bit, make you think a little bit. And one of them that happened this week was Jalen Mbakwe, a guy that uh, I thought had a pretty bright future at Alabama. Incredible athlete, special athlete. Um, and Alabama in the past, and really, I think it's still there. There's a culture of next man up, but you hate to see guys with that kind of talent leave the program.
Well, CJ, as of 4:49, is what time we are recording here on I can't remember. It's Tuesday. Jalen Bogway actually did pull his name back out of the portal and is going to stay at Alabama. So
Ooh.
I'm sorry to break that news to you live, live and on the air. But
That's
no, I
perfect.
mean, to your point, it just goes to show the craziness of the state of college football that we're
Mhm.
currently in. Mbakwe enters his name in a port. The first report is he has a seven-figure offer from another school to enter the portal, which on the surface is just the most ridiculous sounding thing ever.
Right.
Then last night, he enters the portal, and then late last night, rumors start flying. Oh, he might pull his name out of the portal, and maybe he wants to play on offense too for Alabama. He's a two-way star at Clay Chalkville.
Play chalkball. Yep.
Actually, played against Ryan Williams in that state championship game and out-tooled him barely. There must have been 100 points scored in that game in Bryant-Denny 2 years ago. But no, Mbakwe apparently is back out of the portal and is gonna also play on offense for Alabama. So no, it certainly doesn't make it any. The fact that he pulled his name out doesn't make it any more normal.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to be comfortable in the space that we're in college football. You just see guys going back and forth, portal, no portal, other teams recruiting players that are on scholarship at other schools. At one point that was illegal, but now it's just kind of a wild, wild west situation. So, well, I think for now, Alabama fans are happy that someone young and talented is staying in the program. But like you said, you got to keep your fingers crossed in this situation. Things could change next week
Sure.
or after
Tomorrow,
the
next
bowl
hour.
game. So, but back to Jackson Arnold, though. Okay, you got a guy who's nationally recognized. I think he was a top 10 player coming out of high school. Now he's headed to Auburn. And he's a young guy heading to Auburn. It's not like you're getting a vet that, that has a lot of experience and can kind of step in and take on the playbook pretty quickly. But you got a young guy that's still developing. Do you think this is a situation where Hugh Freeze thinks this guy probably has more potential than Deuce Knight, or is he just a bridge to Deuce Knight, allowing him the opportunity to develop at practice?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because I don't think any coach in the SEC wants to put all their eggs in the basket of starting a freshman. But that being said, if Freeze can get Jackson Arnold to a point where he's even say 80% of what he was advertised as, I mean, that's your starter for the next 2 years, you would think, barring a situation where he had such a good year, because I guess he'd be eligible to go to the NFL after 2 years at Oklahoma and 1 year at Auburn. I don't foresee a situation where he's so good at Auburn in 2025 that he goes right to the NFL. But, unless that were to happen, or unless he were to, be really what he was at Oklahoma for the last year, it didn't play until the bowl game as a freshman in 2023. But if he's about average to pretty good, you have to assume he's probably the starter for the next 2 years, unless, of course, he could transfer again. You saw TJ Finley's finding his fifth school in 6 years this week going to Tulane. So, certainly don't rule a situation like that out. Also, if he feels like, Deuce Knight's breathing down his neck after 1 year and Jackson Arnold has just an okay year and Deuce Knight is supposed to be the guy. Because I think in an Auburn ideal world, Deuce Knight is good enough to be your starting quarterback by 2026 by the time he's a sophomore. So in that situation, I don't know what would happen. I guess it would depend what 2025 looks like. It also depends, again, if Jackson Arnold, I said it earlier, is a complete disaster and Auburn's bad again in 2025, Hugh Freeze might not be around for 2026, which would mean Deuce Knight might not be around for 2026. So there's a lot of factors at play. I guess in an ideal world for Auburn, he's sensational and goes right to the NFL after 1 year. I don't really foresee that happening, but assuming that doesn't happen, there's a lot of directions it could go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the news didn't stop there this week. Even bigger news than these college students jumping back and forth was Coach Bill Belichick going to North Carolina. And, understood that it's an ACC program, but that is just another somebody that you have to compete with in the portal system. I mean, Coach Deion Sanders came in and just became a pretty dominant force in the portal once he moved over to Colorado. Now you see Coach Bill Belichick going to North Carolina, and I'm sure he's going to set up their whole program like an NFL-like system. So, is this something that the SEC programs need to keep an eye out on? That this is somebody they're going to have to compete with, even if it's not on the field.
Yeah, that's probably the most interesting piece of news making a in 2024, making a late push here
Yeah.
at the end of December. And and I don't know if you know this, I'm a big Patriots fan, so Bill
Yeah.
Belichick winning the Super Bowl is a large part of my childhood, so I couldn't help but be happy for him. That being said, I when it first came out that he was being interviewed, it almost sounded like a joke, and didn't think there was any chance he could have success at the college level. And then it became pretty real. Like there was a possibility that this could happen. And, they started reporting how the strategy would be. He would kind of just be the figurehead, and, someone else they would go the general manager route in college, and Belichick would just kind of coach, which, let's be honest, if you know anything about Bill Belichick, he's doesn't strike you as a guy who wants to be walking into recruits' living rooms and trying to convince parents their son should come play for him. So in a situation like I think he can win. I think I don't think he's gonna make UNC a national championship program, but I think he should be able to at least get the most out of the talent that's there. I guess the big question is talent acquisition. Can he get the talent to come there? But they're having some big name visits at the very least from the portal already. So I'm curious to see how it works out. I don't know that long term. I mean, he'll be there what, 2 years, 3 years in a. I don't think he's going to take another NFL job even if it goes well. I think he's kind of just accepted that this is what he's doing now. But I'm certainly curious to see how it goes.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think I read this somewhere where, you know, of course, I think he is going to enjoy his time at North Carolina, but I think there's a long-term goal of maybe his son being kind of coaching waiting at North Carolina. I read that somewhere as well. So I think they're playing the long game here. I think you'll have kids that at least want to go check it out, just to say that they went and spoke with Coach Bill Belichick, a guy who is considered probably the greatest coach of all time. So it'll be interesting to see how many guys actually commit to North Carolina. That area of North Carolina is a great recruiting hub. If he could get some of those guys to stay home, you may see some things change around there. But moving off the current events, the news cycle that happened this week. Now that we've gotten through the season, and we've kind of seen how the committee thinks, and we've seen how the playoff bracket works. What are your thoughts on the 12-team system? And is there something that you'd like to see different from this system?
Yeah, I think everybody is pretty clearly and for good reason not a fan of the auto bids. I mean, I a lot of people have said you could see this changed after 1 year in terms of the system. I don't really see how that happens because obviously the contract is for 2 years, and the expectation after that point is it expands even further. I'm not a fan. To be, I was a fan when it initially came out of expansion. We're talking 4 years ago. At this point, I was a fan, and I thought the idea of more meaningful postseason football, is great. Yeah, and I'm excited for the playoff. It'll be fun. The 3 good games on Saturday and a good game on Friday night with Notre Dame and Indiana as well. But I don't know. It's certainly, I think the fears around it have been proven to be validated.
Mhm.
I think the regular season was devalued. Even take the SEC championship. I went last year when it was Georgia and Alabama, and obviously it was de facto playoff game and a playoff environment, a national championship environment. It felt like it's really the best, even for an NFL stadium and a neutral site, quote unquote, in Atlanta. It was the best college football environment I've ever been in. And watching on TV this year with Georgia and Texas, when you knew they're both going to the playoff, it's just not the same. And there are benefits. I get it. We'll see Georgia or say Texas play Clemson this week in a home playoff game that should be a lot of fun. In Ohio State and Tennessee, it should be fun. I'm not, complete now that it's here. I'm not gonna say like, oh, like I'm not even excited. Of course, I'm excited about the playoff. It's gonna be fun, but it definitely the fears around it in my mind have been pretty clearly valid. I mean, look at Penn State and Oregon, for example. Or Penn State loses the Big Ten championship to undefeated Oregon and gets the easiest path of any team playing in the first round. I mean, it's just laughable, and that a lot of that has to do with the auto bids. But even still, it's like, okay, they're hosting SMU instead, while Oregon is going to have to play the winner of Ohio State, Tennessee. It just none of it makes any sense.
No, it doesn't. I'm on track with you, and to be honest with you, I don't have a solution right now. It will
Yeah.
take a lot more time of me kind of going through this process, and it's hard to know even not knowing what the committee's thinking, what they're considering, and really what their experience is with football. And so it is a flawed system, but I think any system is going to be flawed in one way or the other. But I think the automatic bid thing is something that you hit right on the head, and has to be figured out. And I also don't like the fact that the conference championship game doesn't really matter. I mean, I think you're going to see coaches even start to coach differently, when, trying to keep guys healthy or not show all your cards prior to going to a playoff. I mean, you could see a lot of things transpire. And then also, I think you got to consider the whole idea of the portal opening up during the middle of this too. So you've pushed all the games back and you've added playoff games and all that, but you've got kids jumping in the portal while teams are in the playoff. That that's gonna get pretty crazy. I could see that working against a lot of teams that are really fighting to win a national championship.
Yeah, we saw last year the early signs of that with I think it was Malik Murphy, Texas's backup quarterback, enters the portal, and you know I think a lot of people want to cast aspersions on the kid and say, oh, they're quitting on their team. They're if they wanted to stay, they could stay. It's really not their fault. I get the criticism. I do. It's but they're put in a situation where okay, if you're a quarterback who's going to transfer, and the big example this year is the Penn State backup quarterback who, has had to play in that
Mhm.
Wisconsin game. He really led a second half comeback when Drew Aller was hurt, and he checks in on some run package. He's like a legitimate part of the offense, and so now this ridiculous gimmicky schedule is potentially impacting games. Good thing last year that Quinn Ewers didn't get hurt. They ended up losing the game, but if Quinn Ewers had gotten hurt last year, you were one like fluky, hand hitting against a helmet on a follow through away from true freshman Arch Manning having to play in the college football playoff, which, in hindsight now, I think he would have done fine, but it's just, you have a system where the people who make the college football calendar are not coaches, they're not players, they're not
Mhm.
people who have the best interest of anyone in mind, but obviously the bottom line. And so, that creates an unfortunate reality where, I mean, every coach thinks the schedule is ridiculous. Every player thinks the schedule is ridiculous. Why hasn't it been changed yet? I mean, I don't think you have people who care making these decisions. So, there's been the popular idea of a college football commissioner. James Franklin even talked about it this week. I think that's going to come eventually. I hope sooner rather than later. Obviously, people have thrown out the idea of Nick Saban being the college football commissioner. I think from a bias standpoint, I don't think the rest of the country would would be willing to put up with that. But someone who has the best interest of college football at heart, and just a governing body to because when there's these big issues with the sport right now, like the calendar and like the auto bits, there's no one to answer for these things. The
No.
people who make these decisions are the television networks and the people who are profiting off it. You need someone who actually can be the face of the sport and answer for, okay, we have this problem, let's talk to players and coaches and figure out the best way to solve it. Currently we just don't have that. There's no one. Okay, you're going to complain, there's no one to complain to, there's no one to solve the problem. So yeah, it's a mess. It's not good. I mean, we talked about the portal earlier. It's the same situation. Everyone's like, we need portal regulation. Okay, who's going to do it? Because then every time the NCAA tries to do something, they're going to get sued, which I'm not going to bat for the NCAA here. The dissolving of the NCAA is fine by me, but you need some sort of governing body to enforce rules and make necessary changes.
Sure. And, Coach Nick Saban, I work quite a bit in DC, go up there about once a month, and he's the only coach I've seen up there actually fighting for the kids, and fighting for the better good of college football. So I would not be opposed if he ended up being the commissioner of college football. Because he's someone that actually cares. He knows exactly what's going on a day-to-day basis, what the players have to go through to prepare for games, and what they have to do to recover from a game as well. So it wouldn't be a bad idea at all. But back to the playoff, much like March Madness, I'm assuming that there's going to be a Cinderella story somewhere in this playoff. It feels like it has to be. You've got 12 teams. Somebody's going to make a run. Somebody's going to shock us over the course of these next couple of weeks. In your eyes, who is that team? I know I've been kind of eyeing it, maybe not a huge run, but at least in that first round of games, I'm looking at Indiana against Notre Dame as a team to upset. But what are your thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's what differs college football from college basketball, and that's why we didn't really need an expanded playoff because I don't see a group of five team winning a game. I don't see Arizona State, unfortunately, and I love Arizona. I mean, Scatterby, it's been a really fun story and what Kenny Dillingham's been able to do. I'm assuming they're going to play Texas in the second round, and they're going to get blasted. That just it is
Sure.
what it is. In terms of a cinder, I guess you could say just because the ridiculous path they have, I actually kind of like Tennessee's chances to make a little bit of run. Again, they have to go to Ohio State and win on the road, and then they have to play Oregon, and then they have to play Texas, and then they have to play presumably Georgia or Notre Dame or Penn State. And so for the Tennessee to win the national championship, it would be the gauntlet of all gauntlets. But I do think they're capable of it because I think they run the ball outstandingly, and I think they stop the run outstandingly, which are two things you need to be able to do. We don't really talk about what you need to do to make a run in the playoffs in college football like you do in the NFL, but now it's like that. So
Sure.
Tennessee, with their ability to run and stop the run, I think has a chance to make a deep run. Again, if at the same time they could lose by 2 touchdowns at Ohio State. So like I said earlier, I am excited about the format because it is fun that we can talk about these scenarios. I just
Yeah.
don't love the ultimate consequences of it.
Well, I got asked the question not too long ago, who outside of the SEC do you like, to go the furthest in this particular scenario? And I kind of went to that Ohio State Tennessee game. I said, well, if Ohio State gets past Tennessee, I could see them making a run just because it's hard to beat a team twice, right? And Oregon's already beaten Ohio State this year, and they're on a neutral site field in that second round. I could see them making a little bit of run, but they got to get past Tennessee first. And if Dylan Sampson's on and he's running the ball like he does, Tennessee's going to be a very tough team to beat. They play very fast, very physical on defense. But I will say, Michael, you talked briefly about that Texas Clemson game and kind of put Texas against Arizona State. You know, I like Texas. I do like Texas. And on paper, Texas is a better team. But for whatever reason, in some of these big time games, even dating back to last year's playoff, Texas has a real tough time moving the ball, especially offensively, for them to have an offensive coach. I think there's somebody that's a team that really should be on upset watch. If Clemson's been hot and Texas has been getting colder and colder, hasn't really played a tough schedule this year, and the big games that they have played in, they've played, less than their kind of below par. It's something to watch.
I can't.
And I know you're an Alabama fan. I know you don't want to pull the
No,
Clemson, but
yeah, no, it's not an Alabama thing. I keep waiting for the elite version of Texas to show up
yeah.
because they do have that kind of roster that
Hmm.
not talking about the I don't know if it rivals the prime Nick Saban Alabama teams, but in terms of that dominant roster with that level of athlete where they just look
Sure.
different than everyone they take the field against, they do have that kind of roster. So, but like you said, for whatever reason, I mean, they had two shots against Georgia, one of them at home and got dominated, and one of them, they outgained Georgia by a ridiculous margin in the SEC championship. Again, granted, it didn't really make a whole lot of difference in the grand scheme of things, but
You
they
got to
had two
turn them
shots
into
against.
points, you know?
Yeah, they had two shots against Georgia and couldn't get it done. And I like Quinn Ewers. I really do. I think he made some really impressive throws in that SEC championship, but for whatever reason, he seems to kind of shrink when the moment gets big.
Mhm.
And this all being said, I don't think there's any chance in the world Texas is losing to Clemson. Because Clemson makes their living off big plays, and Texas makes their living off of limiting big plays. They're number one in the country at doing just that. And when Clemson, you saw it in the Georgia game. Granted, this is week one when Clemson played Georgia, but that's kind of what I don't think Clemson's going to lose by 30, but I think that this game will look similar to that. I don't think Clemson is going to be able to do much of anything on offense, especially on the road. And I think Texas is going to be able to do enough to at least win by 2 touchdowns.
Okay. All right. Well, so you've got Texas in that bottom bracket on the left side. You've got are you going Tennessee against
I'm
Ohio
taking
State?
Tennessee. Yeah,
You're
I am
picking
taking
Tennessee
Tennessee.
against Ohio State. Now let's go over to the other side. We've got Indiana, Notre Dame. Who do you got there?
Notre Dame in a close one. I actually think Notre Dame has a chance to win the national championship
Oh
a little
wow.
bit.
Okay.
And for the same, it's almost for the same reason as you can make a case for almost anyone in that field. There's just no elite team, and if there was ever a year for Notre Dame to, finally take that next step and win a national championship, or at least play in a national championship for the first time since 2012 against Alabama, this would be the year. Like, I think there will be a big attitude shift from our region of the country if Georgia lines up against Notre Dame next week, like they're expected to. I think if assuming Notre Dame handles Indiana at home, that Georgia's just going to destroy them because it's Georgia against Notre Dame. I don't know. I don't really love
Mhm.
that matchup for
Yeah.
Georgia. I'd hesitate to pick against them because I picked against them both times against Texas. And certainly, if that's a national championship matchup, I don't think I'll be picking against Georgia a third time against Texas. But yeah, I think I'm gonna take Notre Dame. I think they're gonna kind of just grind this one out. Same similar reason to the Texas Clemson game. They have better athletes. Indiana's been a fun story, but
Yeah.
they played an elite team in Ohio State, and you saw how that went, and it was on the road. But this might be the biggest football game in the history of the state of Indiana. I think
Oh,
you could
sure.
probably make that argument.
Easily, easily. And the only thing I question about Notre Dame, I do think that they have a solid roster. They have some really good athletes. They've got a running back who could, potentially be a Heisman front runner going into next year. But how will they react if they're down a couple possessions? Is Riley Leonard the guy that's going to bring them back down a couple
Hmm.
possessions? I don't know that I trust him to that extent. Now, if things are going their way, sure. I think they've got the offensive line. I think they got running back, and I think Riley Leonard's feet as well is another option for them to go to as well. That is a dangerous threat. But if they were to get behind, do I trust him to really be the guy that stands up and throw the ball to win the game? I don't know that I believe in that. So that's why I kind of picked that game as maybe my upset alert along with the Clemson, Texas.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually, in terms of spread, I really like every underdog, at least on the surface. And then,
yeah.
I talk about the Clemson game, you dig a little bit deeper, and it's, I think, 11 and a half. And you think, yeah, I think Texas is going to find a way to run away with this one. But I think you can make a case for at least a close game in everyone. And
Mhm.
Notre Dame, Indiana is probably the one I feel best about being a
Okay.
close game.
Yeah. So, all right, now we go down to the bottom of the right side. We've got Penn State and SMU. Where do you stand there?
So annoying. And I know he's your old coach, but you know how I feel about James
Yeah.
Franklin, just purely from a he rubs me the wrong way perspective. And so SMU. I guess it was a fun story. I hope it's not a situation where Penn State destroys them and every Alabama fan says, see, we should have been, because Alabama really, like, they only have themselves to blame for not making
Mhm.
the playoff. They lost by 21, really 14, given that Ryan Williams touchdown against Oklahoma. But to a dreadful Oklahoma team late in the season with their complete destiny in their control. So whatever happened at that point, granted, that SMU Clemson game, you literally couldn't have drawn up a worse way for Alabama for that to end if you brought in a Hollywood scriptwriter. It was literally the worst scenario possible, because I do think if Clemson had ran away with that, Alabama would have been in, and this would have been an Alabama Penn State matchup. Not a great matchup for Alabama, by the way, on the road against Penn State. But yeah, I think Penn State wins by 2 touchdowns. I just don't. I mean, putting it as simply as SMU going up to 20-degree state college weather in December. I mean, how could you pick against Penn State in this one?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I think Penn State runs away with that game. And before we wrap up here, there is an opportunity this year for the teacher to meet the student. How likely is it that Georgia and Kirby Smart meet Oregon and Dan
Mm.
Lanning in the championship game?
I think that's probably the most likely
Okay.
outcome if you said, all right, pick what the championship game is going to be. Because of that, I think it won't happen, and something wacky will happen. I
Yeah.
think whether it be Georgia or even Oregon losing their first round game, I think one of them certainly could go down in that second week of this playoff. I think Penn State actually has a pretty good chance to, if they do, and they're going to handle their business against SMU, and then guess what? What's the reward for losing the Big Ten championship? They play Boise State, so I think Penn State has a pretty good chance to certainly be in the semifinal and maybe even make the national championship. I won't be surprised if there's a Penn State Oregon rematch. I won't be shocked if it's a Tennessee Notre Dame guy. There is a lot of ways that this can go. I think if you were going to pick a most likely outcome and you said, all right, what do you think the national championship's going to be? I'd have to agree, probably Georgia, Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been asked several times this year, who's the best team in college football? And I said, I don't know. I simply don't know. There's a lot of teams that can make arguments, and as soon as I make an argument for one team, they go and lose to somebody. So this has been a crazy, crazy year of college football, and I have enjoyed so much being able to watch it and be able to come back and report to our audience here at Yellowhammer. So we're looking forward to these next couple of weeks. We'll see how it all plays out. We'll definitely be back, check in with you all once we see these games being played. And we just thank you all for being back here this week. Thank you, Michael, for your time. And as you all know, you can catch us anytime on yellowhammernews.com, YouTube, Spotify, all your social platforms. You will be able to find us. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you soon.